Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Azure Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and our guest this week is Jason Nees with the OSV Institute. Jason, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing
Thanks
great.
for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you face to face. I understand that that's a rare treat for you because you started a job in February of 2020. And you were in the office for a little bit and have been remote ever since. So tell me a little bit about what that's been like.
It's interesting. I think that I'm not alone in living through this new remote world. It seems like a lot of places are going that way. But it was very interesting to start in February of 2020. End of February, be in the office for about 3 weeks. I got through some kind of the standard orientation stuff, and then we all got the email that starting tomorrow we're working from home because of this pandemic. So it's been an interesting transition into meeting new people and learning the company. From without where that's one of the instances where the hallway talk is really nice, where you can just meet somebody, find out their history, and you learn from that.
Yeah, for sure. So how have you adapted to that? How have you built relationships with your coworkers without having, the same office environment?
I mean, really just trying to, I think one of the things that virtual is doing is it kind of gets you into business talk really quick. Because I think you just feel like, all right, we're here, we're on this Teams meeting, that's what we need to do. So I think just really trying to do that same thing, just starting off conversations casually and getting to know each other a little bit better. Because again, like I said, I think that's where you can learn a lot as people start to talk about past roles they have and why they were there and what they learned in that role. You can learn the company better that way and the people you're working with. Yeah.
So how has that been for you? And I've given up on trying to find common threads. I think it's different for everyone, but how has remote work worked for you?
It's going really well. I answered this question in that it was really odd at first, right? I feel like when you're kind of forced into it, and I'm probably telling a very similar story, but I started off working from home. I mean, really, we had heard some buzz about it, and then it was ultimately, okay, starting tomorrow, this is official. So it was carry my laptop home, slap it on a card table with an uncomfortable chair, and figure it out. And so I had worked, from home in, randomly throughout the years, but it was always just sitting on your couch and doing something. But when I wanted it to be a little bit more permanent, so that's what got odd. And then it was just as that drug along, figuring out at what point is this really going to get permanent? And do I need to do a little bit more? And just the simple stuff like a desk that felt more like an office and a chair that, didn't kill your back and stuff like that. But I think that once it got to the point where, because we've decided now we're going to be hybrid. So we've got certain days in the office, certain days out. So once we got to that point where we knew it was long term, I could start to make those moves to bring it into more of a comfort zone of this is where I go to work versus, where I'm living. Yeah.
So if you don't mind sharing, what's the arrangement? Are there certain days when everybody's in? Is it just, based on individual preference?
Yeah, it's really departmental. We actually just signed a new hybrid work policy where they worked in, you just, it's the manager of your department. We're deciding what to do. So ours within the Institute, we are meeting 1 day a week in the office. Others as needed, or even outside of the office if needed. If we meet, we work in Huntington. All of us live in Fort Wayne, so occasionally a Panera meeting is much more convenient for a couple-hour in-person discussion. But we are 1 day in the office. We're actually converting one of our 3 offices now into more of a whiteboard strategic room, a little more comfortable. So with the intention of when we're there, we're not co-working, but we are whiteboarding, making decisions. Break off, go execute, come back, touch base, innovate some more.
Well, it sounds like you're leveraging the best of both. I mean, it's, when you need collaboration and you need multiple brains in the same room, you can do that. And when you need to get stuff done and avoid interruptions, you can do that.
Yeah, one of the things we've joked about as we started to talk is what will this new world look like is I'm not going to go back and sit in my office alone and work anymore. I can do that here. It's, and again, we live in Fort Wayne, offices in Huntington. It's a 40-minute drive, so it's safer. I'm saving time. So, there's just things that don't make sense that we just did out of habit. We used to do out of habit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's an advantage to have that option. So I applaud your company for leveraging, what's good about it and also giving people the opportunity to work together in a collaborative space. So we are at the present, but we're going to back way up and talk about your career path, because as I think you know, on this podcast, we talk about marketers' career path, we talk about their organizations, we talk about the projects we're working on. So let's start with career path. My understanding, this is actually before my time, and I've been here for a while, but you were actually an intern. Was it at Asher in this building, or were you down the street in the gray house?
I think it was down the street. It's not very far, right? It was also on Wayne. So I think it was down the street, because I think I remember from a friend that worked here at the time when you moved that it was shortly after. But I could be wrong on that, honestly. It feels like so long ago.
All right. So take us through. You grew up in Fort Wayne and you went to St. Francis.
Uh-huh.
What did you study in it? Did you always know what you wanted to do? That's the first question. And then how did you move into the career path from there?
Yeah, always know what I want to do, I think, in a sense, right? I always knew I was always interested in art. I was always, just as a kid, just sketching, drawing. Yep. I think back to kind of my earliest thoughts of, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was an animator. There was something about, watching movies, and, back Disney movies were very popular then and still are, of course, but it was that animation and just drawing cartoons and stuff. And there was something that always intrigued me with that. And it's funny, as I look back, I think that one of the things I realized that intrigued me about that is the mix between art and technology. And that's one of the things that really is drawing me to what I'm doing now. So, I started with that, but I got into... I went to high school at Northrop, and with Park Ginder was my baseball coach and art teacher, which was interesting. And he started a computer art class and invited a handful of people to do that he knew were interested. And that's what got me hooked, really, using, Adobe Photoshop, early versions of Adobe Photoshop to just create art. And, that turned into page layout and different forms of, mixed media. So that's really where it all started.
Okay.
I went to St. Francis, got a degree in computer art, multimedia design. So really, there's kind of a trend of I wanted to try a little bit of everything. So just having an understanding of how animation worked, how photography, how videography, graphics, and that's where it all started.
All right. So talk about, you do a little internship with Asher, and then where do you go from there? What's your first real job, if you will, and then how do you progress from that point?
Yeah, my junior year at St. Francis, actually, I landed an internship with International Truck and Engine, so probably more commonly known as Navistar, but it was International when it was here in Fort Wayne where the design center was.
Yep.
Actually, through a connection with Alan Knotts at St. Francis, I got that internship, did that for a little longer than a summer, and actually got hired full-time there as a contractor before I graduated.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, which was great as a college senior, not have to worry about that, but also, taking night classes and working full time. They were very flexible with me, but I was still had the job to do.
Yeah.
So puts for about the last 6 months,
puts a little bit of a cramp in your senior in college style.
Yeah, true. But it was good to know, and I enjoyed the job, so it was fine. So I got started doing that as a graphic designer. That's really, as I went through, that's kind of been my passion and kind of the skill that I've always honed in on. So I started off there as a graphic designer. Very interesting job. I was in the industrial design department, so we were designing the new trucks.
Okay.
So I was doing gauge cluster graphics and, anywhere from large, really cool illustrations that go, vinyl applied to the outside of a truck to, the seatbelt icon that lights up when you forget to put your seatbelt on. Those get designed.
Wow. So are you doing that using what would now be the Adobe Creative Suite? Are you using CAD, or are you using, how are you doing that?
I used Adobe. There was a team of industrial design engineers that would transfer anything I did that needed to become, as example, there's the name badges that you see that are in chrome that are on the back of every car and on the side of every truck. I would create that in 2D in Illustrator, and then work with them to work on the curves and the reflections and so forth to get it into a 3D form.
Wow. Okay. So they're almost re-engineering from a realistic design.
Right.
That's pretty great. All right. So you're at Navistar and you're doing truck design stuff. How long are you there, and then where do you go from there?
I was there for a couple years. And then ended up with a company called Franklin Electric here in town as a graphic designer there, and that was back in 2006.
Okay. All right. So walk us through the rest of the story from 2006 until now.
Yeah, so I got with Franklin. It's a great company. Again, doing design work on a team, basically an in-house agency team, and really just kind of progressed in my career there from being a graphic designer into a role that was developed that was media and technology manager. So really bringing social media, video, some kind of new marketing trends, at that point into what we were doing, trying to step out of the simple print catalogs and so forth, putting a little more attention to what we did with websites and starting to grow that. From there, kind of jumped from that role back into managing the team of graphic designers.
Okay.
And then that ultimately led into with the role that I had the majority of the time was director of corporate communications, which was running that in-house agency team.
Oh, wow.
That was designers, events planning, web developers, and photography, videography. We did really all of it in-house. It was a pretty incredible team. Still is. They're still doing great work. So
So you had no prior supervisory or management experience coming into that job. Is that true?
Correct.
So what was that like? Because, I've had a somewhat of a similar experience in that I was a writer, and then all of a sudden, I think some of it is just aging into the role of being a manager, but there's not a lot of prep for it. You're just kind of in the role and you learn as you go.
Yeah, ultimately. Yeah. I mean, I say I didn't have prior manager experience. It's not quite true. Through high school and college, prior to, getting into the marketing career, I worked for Pizza Hut, and I was a manager through college at Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot there about my management style from being a restaurant manager. It's funny, those of us in marketing will know that this is funny. And when I say that the demands of a restaurant are very similar to the demands as high paced and you have to have it done now. And I mean, marketing can be a very high paced, deadline driven and right. And so you learn a lot there. And one of the things I think that I learned that I have that style now is when you're struggling or an employee is struggling is to, roll up your sleeves and help them, show that you're there, show that you can also do it. And, you're not just speaking the language, and just make sure that you are, understanding of what they're going through and help them get through it.
Yep. So you're managing a team that's doing a lot of different things. Are you doing any graphic design at that point, or are you
not a lot. At that point, I'm pretty hands off. I mean, again, like I said, I like to roll up my sleeves. So there were times when we would hit, bumps in trying to come up with an ad campaign, and the designer was struggling. And at that point, I had a design manager who was incredible as well. But, there were times when I would just say, you need a break from it. Let me take a look. Let me just see if some different eyes can do something. Other than that, I didn't do much. I would do some executive presentations and so forth, which would include some design, but I was pretty hands off at that point.
Okay. All right. So you're there for, is it 17 years, Franklin?
13.
13. I don't know where I got 17 from. And then you moved to OSV. So tell us what you're doing today, and maybe we'll transition into the second group of questions. I always knew it as Our Sunday Visitor. Now it's the OSV Institute. So talk a little bit about how your organization is branded today, how OSV Institute fits into OSV writ large, or vice versa. I obviously don't know what I'm talking about, so please save me from myself. Yes.
So Our Sunday Visitor is what it originally was founded as back in 1907. So a very long-standing company. And it just recently rebranded to OSV. I think it's I would think that happened just before I started, but I think a pretty standard. I mean, it was getting called that. It seemed like a good transition.
So formalizing the acronym that everybody,
So the acronym, the company goes by OSV. The actual news, which is Our Sunday Visiting, originally the name was because it started off as a newspaper, a weekly newspaper. So it's more digital now, but the news, if you go to osvnews.com, it's still Our Sunday Visitor. It has that type of feel still, but the company is OSV.
And was it founded in Huntington in 1907?
Yes, and I said 1907. It was 1912.
1912. Okay, so I threw you off when I took your 13 years and turned it into 17.
Right, I know.
Math is not our strong suit.
We shouldn't even be throwing out dates because it's all just trying to remember those anyway.
No more numbers, just words. Okay, so tell us a little bit about the organization. What happens at the organization? What your role is? What your team looks like? All those good things.
Yeah. So OSV, like I mentioned, started off as a newspaper. It started off with Bishop Knoll was just looking for new ways to get out the message, the gospel message, and started with this paper that he got. He got a printing press. The story is he got a printing press sold to him for $1. Started printing papers to just tell the good news, combat some of the kind of anti-Catholic, anti-Christian talk that was going at the time, and that's how it started. And it's grown into a large Catholic serving organization with solution. Our main customer are Catholic parishes, so we actually serve. Back to numbers, but about 15,000 of the 19,000 parishes in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
In varying degrees. So I think that, even as I knew them before starting, was the paper, books, we're the largest Catholic publishing company in the U.S., and envelopes. So tithing envelopes is still a major product of ours, and we're printing millions of envelopes a week.
Yep.
But it's grown into more of a technology company. We're really offering online giving platforms, website templates for parishes, CRMs, church management software for parishes, just anything to kind of help a parish run as a company, then as well as consulting services, and then school curriculum. I mean, there's so many things that we're doing to serve that group. Sure.
So it's not just a provider by any means, not just a provider of print services and technology services. There's actually content development happening there.
Yeah, and that's what's great. What's really nice is, as an example of a kind of a key blend of that is in our website templates. There's a service that you can add to it that we'll just constantly put on new content. So, from a parish office that doesn't have the resources or the time to go out and find this content.
Yep.
Well, we're doing, news all the time. We can place that content right on there for you. So it's a nice blend of, kind of what we've always done and what we're getting into more now.
Sure. So what did you know about the organization coming in the door in February of 2020, and what maybe surprised you about it?
I think, I kind of touched on this already, but what I knew was, and honestly, I knew very little. Yeah. I mean, I knew of the paper. I knew of actually my days at Franklin interviewing some people, some graphic designers that worked there and trying to understand, wait, there's a whole, there's a design team, I think it's just more what because when things are in print, it's more obvious. You see all these envelopes, you're going to see the logo, you understand that. I think it's all the things that go on in the background, especially from a digital technology side, that you just don't realize. So just seeing that, how many of these parishes we were working on and how many different solutions we have for them is pretty incredible.
Yeah. So what does your team look like? Who do you work with? How many are there? And obviously it's a hybrid from an environment standpoint, but what's the work you're actually doing and how does it get done?
Yeah. So what I didn't get into, so everything I've talked about so far with OSV, that is kind of the core business.
Yep.
And so OSV is a nonprofit. So we on the OSV Institute side, which is kind of a separate, it's definitely a separate department, almost runs as a little separate company, is the philanthropic arm of that. So what we need, of course, to maintain nonprofit status, and the purpose, the mission of our company is to serve the church, is we've got to find ways to give back, that revenue that we're gaining. So for many years, about 3 years after it was founded, Bishop Knoll thought, well, he started to print these things, started to make some money and said, this isn't mine. I have to give it back. So that's how the Institute really started. And since that point for, until about 2017, which I'll get into here, is the Institute was just a kind of a grant-making organization, finding other people that were doing good things and applying for money and giving them grants. So the Institute was, ultimately, I'm sure there are varying levels. I'm sure, I'm still fairly new, so I don't want to say anything incorrectly, but, it was somebody writing grants and giving out money. In 2017, the board decided we want to take a little bit more of a proactive approach to really do something so we feel like we can really impact the church. The first thing they decided to do was put together a committee out of the board, and the committee decided we need a president over the Institute. So they hired Jason Shanks, who is our president. he came in and started to put together some more proactive strategic approach, focusing where these grants that will only grant things that are within certain initiatives that we really think the church needs to kind of prosper. And in that, he started to develop outside resources and decided, I need to start to build our own team because we're starting to do some good things. So out of that, so Jason Shanks is the president. Actually, on the same day back in February 2020, he hired me to handle marketing and Matt Smith to do strategic alliances. So we're building a lot of partnerships with different organizations that we are granting money. And Matt came on to really, while I was out to market what we were doing, Matt came on to build those relationships and start to foster them in different ways.
Okay. So what does that work look like for you? How are you spending your time?
So it's right now, one of the things that intrigued me, besides my Catholic faith and what we were doing to serve the church, one of the things that intrigued me was getting in on kind of the ground floor of something new.
Yeah.
So where I went from leaving Franklin with a team of about 15, now I'm a marketing team of 1.
Yeah.
Now we're starting to build. I'm actually currently hiring somebody. So it's, that idea of being in on the ground floor of something new that intrigued me, it's starting to grow.
So is this a position that you have prospects and you're imminently going to hire someone, or is it still looking for candidates?
We somewhere in the middle there.
Okay.
So the resume is not closed, or the resume application is not closed. But I've got some interviews lined up with some good candidates. So we'll see. But we are right in the heart of it at the moment.
Okay. All right. So you'll double the size of your team.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, again, being in on the ground floor, and really, I told you, like I hinted to earlier, I like to get my hands dirty, right? And so this kind of gave me the opportunity, and I was a good fit for this role in that, back to my background and everything I've touched, I knew a little bit about all of it. So I could come in and start doing any and everything. So, I mean, I'm doing, which again, I love, I'm doing the design work. I'm doing website maintenance. I'm doing copywriting. I'm doing PR. We're working with a couple outside groups as well, that just relationships that were already established. But I'm able to do a lot of that on my own. And it took about a year to figure out, okay, here's what makes sense. Here's where we need some help. And here's where we're running out of bandwidth.
Yeah, for sure. So what are some of the major projects? Obviously, hiring someone is a project unto itself. But what are some of the other things that are taking up the majority of your headspace, taking up your time, maybe keeping you up at night, maybe getting you excited, maybe all of those things combined?
Yeah. So when, to jump back to kind of where I talked about we were a proactive approach, we rebranded in January of this year from OSV Institute to OSV Institute for Catholic Innovation, really putting a focus on here's what we're going to do. And what that is going out and just finding new ideas, right? We're called to minister and evangelize, and not to speak bad about the grants that we were giving, but a lot of them were great stuff, but very not scalable, not really sustainable. They were very local impact.
Sure.
So we're looking for new ideas that really could make a difference in the landscape of the Catholic Church. So our focus is there. And one of the reasons we found, which is I'm leading into one of the projects, is the OSV Challenge. So one of the things Jason did just before we started this thing called the OSV Challenge. And that was just a call for new ideas. And we found that it's a real nod to marketing in that from taking an approach of there's a board grant approval process, cycle, and if you have your application in by this point, we're granting money depending to, apply now for a chance at $100,000 prize.
Yeah.
It's ultimately the same.
Yeah.
We're looking for ideas to give money to.
Sure.
But just that different approach just brought in this different energy, this different level of ideas. And we kind of did an internal evaluation and looked back at an impact of the grants we had given over the last 3 years and the ideas that we had gotten just in the first year of this challenge. And, it was a large difference. These were ideas that were way more innovative, something new. It doesn't have to be, not that the things that people are working on aren't great, and it could just be new ways to approach some of these ideas.
Sure.
But just looking at it in a different way. They were scalable, they're sustainable. We just saw a different level of impact. So we realized we need to focus on this. So that leads into kind of our main project, which is what we call the OSV Challenge. We are just about to move into the semifinal round So we started taking applications in early February. Pretty simple application process. What's your idea? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What motivates you? We got 650 applications.
And I assume these are from all over the country?
All over the country,
okay, yeah.
U.S. and Canada. And ultimately leads to $300,000 prizes to accelerate your idea. We've grown it this year to not only... we did this last year as well, but really put a little bit more focus this year to not only, it's not just a contest with a prize at the end. As you develop through there, we give seed money. So as we move into this semifinal round, these 25 semifinalists are going to get an amount of money to help them accelerate into the next round. So if they're, a lot of these are brand new ideas, so they may not have a website yet. And so a lot of times we're looking for them to kind of start to be able to pitch their idea, and they don't have the resources yet. So we're going to help them along the way. And we partnered last year with Notre Dame, this year with a University of St. Thomas out of Houston, Texas, to put together a business accelerator that we put them through. So they're going to go through a 6-week accelerator that will help them really learn how to take their idea into an actual formal pitch and business plan.
Oh, wow. So it's not just funding, and it's providing some support to actually bring it to life.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what we don't want to do is have all these people, put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into these ideas, and then only 3 win.
Yeah.
We're also... so we're trying to find these innovators and get them kind of into our tribe, but we're also looking for investors, right? I mean, of course, OSV is funding a large portion of this, but we're looking for other investors. If there may be something that we don't think fits quite within what we're looking to do, but there could be somebody within the state that this idea came from that's looking to fund things as well. If we can make that connection, perfect, right? We're just looking. There's a lot of good ideas out there.
Yeah.
We're just looking for how to bring them to surface and get them to be successful.
Yeah. So going back to the rebranding effort, how did you pull that off? You can walk through, without giving anything proprietary away, obviously. How did you get that done? What did the process look like?
We sat, and so this new team, right? We've been together now. At this point, we did this late in 2020, so we've been together for about 6 months. Kind of Matt and I came in and learned what we learned. We sat in a room in Huntington for about 2 days and did just what I talked about. What we plan to do is we just got on a whiteboard and we just went through a strategic, sprint meeting of here's where we're at. I told you we did that impact review. Here's what's working. How do we shift to focus on this? What should we do? And, we really just decided this idea of innovation is just something that let's just bring to the surface. Let's not, try to do it. Let's just go all in. Let's do a rename. Let's focus on it. And it's not that it's something we came up with, right? There are a lot of innovative people. And I think that's one of the reasons we brought it to the surface. I think a lot of times the word just scares people. They think they're not innovators. So what we're trying to do is just find that in everyone. Everyone's got great ideas.
Sure.
And, I mentioned... Archbishop Noel started the company with just, let's try a new way to get this out.
Yep.
That's how the company started. So it's at our core.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. So it started to really just fall into place as we started to write things down and set the values and set what our new mission would be. It just all started to fall into place. And, then it got into kind of the practicalities of it. We need to change the website. We need to change the logo. We need to do PR. I mean, all the standard process, and we did that and to launch early this year.
Yeah. So that's a lot. You're hiring someone, you just did a rebranding, you're launching this contest. Anything else that's taken up a lot of your headspace or a lot of your time?
Yeah, so that's one. What, as I kind of hinted toward, one of the things, this challenge is just a piece of it. We're trying to kind of create this ecosystem. So as I mentioned, a tribe of kind of a 3-tiered tribe of innovators. So these people that are coming up with ideas on a regular basis, let's get them in, let's help them. We're also looking for mentors and coaches. There are also people that maybe started, now they're successful. Let's get them helping these new ideas, and then investors. So we've got that group of people. So we're kind of creating along with that, this ecosystem, right? So the challenge is a means to get your idea from, a napkin to a business.
Yep.
We also are trying to inspire that. So another big project we're working on is something we're calling OSV Talks.
Okay.
Very similar to TED Talks, but just from prominent Catholic leaders around the country, just doing something very similar to Ted's style is just questioning, why are we doing it this way? There may be new ways, or just kind of inspiring, stirring up discussion about just to get people to think differently. And ultimately what that, we kind of complete that circle of maybe one of the, the kind of the ideal scenario would be somebody watches one of these talks, gets an idea, decides to do something with it. We've got an avenue for them to do something with it. It becomes successful. Then they become one of our mentors. And then as we're also doing capacity grants for some of these, companies that we're going to start off and they become successful. If we see them continuing to be successful and continuing to have impact, we're going to do capacity grants as well. So then, you can see then they can start to, some of these people then could give one of our talks, and we just kind of continually going through that circle.
So is the talk series, has that launched, and are there examples out there that people could listen to?
Yes.
Or is that okay?
osvtalks.com. Right. There are I think if I'm right on the number, there are 16 or 17 I'm getting ready to launch. So currently we are launching them, I'm launching them almost like a product release on a monthly basis. But we just recorded a new wave, and we're going to be releasing those here in a couple months. So there's a lot of great ones. It's, take a look if it's a topic that interests you. We've got a lot of different categories within them, but they're really well done. They're beautifully produced. We work with a company out of the Chicago area called ODB Films, who's produced Full of Grace, Paul the Apostle, so some feature films. So they're beautifully produced. Something a little different, actually, that the COVID pandemic did is the idea was to have conferences with an audience and film these similar to what TED does. We did that once, and then we couldn't have conferences anymore. So this has turned into an in-studio production value recording, and it's interesting. It's giving it kind of a new style, and we really like it. And you can be a little bit more creative with camera angles and the set, rather than it being on a stage and having to worry about the lighting for audience and everything. We can really focus on the speaker. So it's really focused on the speaker and the passion that comes through as they're giving these talks.
So as it evolves, do you see yourself going back to the conference format, or do you think you're going to stick with?
I think we may do a blend. It's a conversation we're having right now. I think it's probably not only for that, but just I think we're all having this conversation, right? What do you do around conferences? We're actually doing our first conference this year. We're going to blend between hybrid and in person, but I think we may do both. I think that what we may do is some focused studio and then maybe kind of dual purpose some. So if we have a conference and we have a great speaker, let's set it up and record it.
Sure.
But we'll see. I think, there's something that we like about the in studio. And it gives the speaker kind of a little bit a different feel for presenting, and they can really focus in on this topic and not the audience. So it gives it an interesting, different perspective. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's kind of a happy accident.
Yeah, exactly.
How it worked out. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to shift to the speed round of the show. And this is where I ask you 3 questions that are more direct, maybe lead to more concise answers, although the answers don't have to be concise. We talked a little bit about your career path. What's the best lesson that you've learned in building a successful career? You have young kids, so maybe it's something you would tell them. Maybe it's something you would tell your team members. Maybe it's something you wish you knew 20 years ago. What's the thing you've learned that you think is most worth sharing about building a career path?
I'm gonna jump away from anything specific to marketing. I think you mentioned marketing, as a career, but I really think that kind of the best advice is just be easy and willing to work with, with people. I think that as I manage a team and as I talk with colleagues, I think I kind of hear a trend of there's 2 things that people complain about. They're either too busy or dealing with certain people, right? So don't be that person.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go a long way just by having good relationships.
Yep.
And being willing to help people, being willing to try new ideas when other people have ideas, willing to listen to those ideas, willing to pick up the phone. I mean, I think that that can go a long way.
Yeah. One of my mantras is be useful. And I think some of that is just being agreeable, that you're not a speed bump on the road to progress. You're helping other people's ideas come to fruition, even if that means just lifting a heavy box to get to
exactly,
to get it moving.
Or at least be open to it. I mean, I think there's a lot, and this is kind of in the innovation spirit that we're trying to do, because we're also trying to, walk the talk a little bit. We do this as we work. We're always thinking of new ideas. We're not, those 2 projects. I mean, you would laugh at how many new ideas come up every week in our conversations of what we should be trying.
Yeah.
But I think that's just something you need to do.
Yeah.
Right. And like you just said, just be open. If people come to you with new ideas, be open to at least trying it and helping them or giving them the means to pursue it.
Yep. Good advice. All right. Second question. If you had to, this is going to be a tough one, but if you had to sum up your organization in a quick phrase, you're obviously still getting your arms around it, but how would you sum up, what would you say if you had 30 to 60 seconds?
Yeah. I mean, when you say your organization, I'm going to talk about the Institute. I think, kind of the elevator pitch for what we're doing is creating this ecosystem of Catholic innovation to just impact the church so that people can just realize the truth and beauty of the Catholic Church.
All right. Well said. So let me digress here for a second. How much of that is an attempt to overcome perceptions that the Catholic Church is stodgy and conservative and sort of stuck in its ways? Is that something that you talk about directly, or is it not a factor in all this?
I don't think we talk about it directly. It comes up. Mm-hmm. I think more so it's to bring light to that fact that there are so many new things that people are trying. I think, anyone, and including myself, is amazed at how many different ministries and apostolates are out there just trying to do new things. Mm-hmm. And like with anything else in an organization, as large as the Catholic Church, it's hard to move a big ship.
Yeah, for sure.
But there are a lot of people trying, and not that it's wrong by any means. There are, there's, like you said, there's a lot of different perceptions. But again, there's new things that are happening that, again, are at a local, they just don't see, you may not notice. But I think mostly we're just trying to bring light and always keeping within the magisterium of everything, right? We're not going off of anything that the Catholic Church teaches, but again, just finding what are those new ways of helping spread that word.
Yeah, and it's shining a light on what's already happening and letting that, be amplified a little bit.
And just, again, helping it become successful, right? A lot of people have good ideas and just don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
We're trying to be that avenue.
Yeah. Well, the last question I want to ask you, and you may be the one of the better people to answer this because of how you started your job. When we started this podcast, I used to ask people about resilience as we were in the midst of the pandemic, but now I talk about, the lessons we've learned from it and what we're taking away from that. So what's something you learned either on the job, doesn't have to be, it could be personally, over the past 14 or so months that you think will stick with you, that you think is a worthy lesson from the pandemic?
From the pandemic. So I don't mean to keep going back to this theme, but you can tell one of the things we do at the Institute is live the mission. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that we've learned from the pandemic, which was all a coincidence, maybe a sign from God that this is what we should be doing, but it's just to be innovative. I think that, and I've even found myself as I look back in the past jobs, even being in the creative field, you get comfortable in what you're doing.
Yeah.
We don't do that right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's always what could we do better? What could we do? How do we do different? Oh, we should try this. Let's try this. And we're always doing it. And it's high pace and it's fast, but it's fun.
Yeah.
And it really leads to learning, as you do more and more of that, learning what's worth pursuing and what's not worth, what's worth leaving alone.
Yeah.
And you really learn what's working, what isn't working, if you just keep trying. So I think that that's something I've learned during this pandemic. And on, specific to the pandemic is, how are we going to work from home and make this work? How do we have a Teams meeting and make it, comfortable for everybody and make it similar to a face-to-face meeting as much as possible? Just the world has done that in general and during this pandemic. It's just, you have to come up with new ways to do things.
So as someone who works for an organization with innovation in the name, how do you foster innovation in an organization? What are some of the tips? And I know that this is not a question I prepared you for, so feel free to say that you're going to pass.
No, it's a good question. It's actually one that we're pursuing at the moment. So, OSV, also very innovative. They are, it's a much larger organization than what we're doing with the Institute with our 4 people. And we've thought of that. And it actually, thinking of the success of what we've done outside, one of the ideas we've thrown around is doing a challenge internally where we focus the employees to think about what's something the company should be doing different. And And, we've thrown around ideas of, if whichever idea wins, they get a certain amount of time to dedicate to that. And let's see if we can really turn it into something. But it's a great question. It's what we're trying to figure out right now. And I think a lot of times, I think we learn, and I remember this from past jobs, is that, again, there's no lack of ideas. A lot of times it's resources and what to do with them and how to get them off the ground. So, it's something we're still dealing with. I think everyone is. It's just, how do you take these ideas that everyone has, bring them to the light of day, and then decide which ones are worth pursuing?
Yeah, well, and part of the genius of it in my mind is that one of the best ways to become innovative and to be inspired is to surround yourself with people who are innovative and who have great ideas. So you kind of bake that into the model.
Yes, of course.
And I'm sure some of that
it's definitely a
bleeds
culture
over.
thing, right?
Yeah. Well, Jason, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing your story with us. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone who took the time to listen to this week's episode. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you will join us then.